So, it's been a couple months since the remaster of Star Wars Dark Forces was released, and I've had plenty of time to dabble with it both casually and in a speedrun sense. Overall, it's a good port and a great way to play the game, minus a few very minor issues. What is important though is the core gameplay still feels pretty one-to-one with the OG version. But today isn't about looking at the actual remaster itself, there are plenty of reviews on that, and while I may eventually share my full thoughts on it and comparing the other major ways to play the game, today I really want to focus on a specific piece of content available in the remaster. Included in the bonus content is a playable level called the Avenger. This was an original demo build for what was supposed to be the very first level, which was showcased at the CES, but apparently ended up getting cut due to difficulty. So, as someone who has played an unreasonable amount of Dark Forces, I wanted to take a look at the level, how it's designed, its influence on the other levels, and other details about it that are pretty unique. At its core, the Avenger is a very basic level. The goal of the level is the exact same as the first level of the main game, Secret Base. You have to steal the Death Star plans and then escape. How this is done, of course, is different, but we'll explore that in due time, so hang tight for a bit. Exploration of the map can be a little awkward, but the more you explore and look around, you'll begin to see that it was designed to mimic the inside of a Star Destroyer. This is a cool idea, although it certainly isn't executed perfectly. But of course, we have to remember this is really just a beta level at its core. I'm a sucker for lost content and beta builds of games, so getting to play through this was a treat for me. As you go through the level, there are some key things to point out. First off is the enemy variety, or lack thereof. The only ones that you find on the map are stormtroopers and Imperial officers, and one interesting note is that the officers and troopers both have the same amount of health, and both drop blaster rifles. So at this point in time, there was no plan, it seems, for the two enemies to be different. The final game, of course, made officers weaker, and also added a variety of other enemies, but it's interesting to see them like this. Major downside means that the enemy variety is a bit lacking, but again, this is an early concept level. The only other real hazard you see in this is the turrets, but they're more or less the same as they are in the main game. The process of getting the objectives complete involves a bit of exploration and key hunting, as you need 2 different keys to complete the level. While the layout isn't exactly clean, you can see here early on that there's some influence on how some of the level design for the game is going to be. Looking through every room is essential, and it does have a sort of feeling to scale that Star Wars Environments has, which is something the full game does do a really good job of conveying. And you do feel the early stages of it here, even if it's a bit rough. Getting the Death Star plans involves sneaking through vents, which is accessed through what I think is the coolest looking area that resembles the captain's deck of the ship, and then exiting the level actually involves using one of the keys to steal a TIE fighter, which sounds way cooler than it ends up actually being. The exit with this isn't exactly clear-cut, and I can see where confusion for this might be, but overall the level is certainly beatable. Sure, it isn't exactly clear in its direction, and some sections are a bit more hidden than others, but it's definitely beatable. I think it's amusing that this level was ultimately cut due to being too difficult for new players, when some of the levels of the final game are far more complicated and unclear than this one was. But of course those levels are certainly more polished. I said this earlier, but it's clear that some design elements that would be key to the final game are present in the level, mainly the scale of the exploration and the number of rooms you have to go through. It is mentioned in the description that parts of the level were used in the final game as well, and you can see this in certain sections. There's very clearly areas that would eventually get reworked into 2 of the levels, those levels being the real first level, Secret Base, and the second to last level, Executor. It's interesting because more of the level feels like it is in Executor, which is even more interesting because this level was supposed to be designed to be the first level, and it's put into a level that would eventually become the penultimate level of the game. There's also plenty of visual elements and ideas that ultimately never get seen outside of the level, so it's cool to see what were some of the early ideas for what the levels were going to look like. I've had a lot of fun things to say about this so far, but at the end of the day, this is still very much a beta level, and that comes with some serious design flaws that they would learn from and eventually iron out. For one, the level's visual design feels a bit off. There's a lot of texture work that feels almost like it's filler, and they didn't really know what to go with, and where there is variety, it almost feels out of place, which is cool, again, because it shows early ideas, and I'm a sucker for that shit. I would not say it's a big issue, but it's noticeable. There's also some very amusing visual glitchiness on the bridge, but again, this is early on, so this was more than likely just the devs getting used to what assets they had to work with. One of the biggest design flaws with this map, however, involves one aspect of the map, which is the lack of checkpoints. Now, this is a demo level, so this really isn't something I would normally criticize. It is annoying, but not earth-shattering. The levels in the final game obviously had multiple checkpoints for when you died and respawned, but there is only the starting point here. The big issue with this is tied to the actual biggest design flaw on the map, which involves this elevator right here. This leads you to the area where the big key objective is getting the Death Star plans. However, if you die, you'll respawn at the start, and while this might not seem bad, this requires you to rewrite the elevator, and you can't. Unless you preemptively reactivate the elevator going down before you die and respawn, it becomes impossible to finish the level because you can no longer get the Death Star plans, effectively soft-locking you. This is one slightly less fun example of how this is very much an early concept level, but luckily we don't see anything like this in the final game. The only other aspect of this that's really worth bringing up is the overall level geometry, switch placement, and overall flow of the level structure does feel kind of clunky and out of place. It definitely feels like after playing through you do see that the developers did learn from this and improved upon it, and there were some obvious concepts that worked well and influenced the game, and ones that didn't work as well were ultimately left out. Overall, for me as a big fan of Dark Forces, going through this map is honestly an interesting treat. Yes, it's not perfect, and very obviously feels like it was an incomplete demo level, but there is a lot of charm in it, and it is cool to see what the early ideas of the game design looked like. It's a nice short piece of extra content on top of a solid re-release of one of my all-time favorite games. And as a speedrunner for the game as well, the level in a speedrun sense is very short. My fastest IL time is 1 minute and 37 seconds, which I'll leave a link in the description for you to check out, or even if you want to compete to try to beat it yourself. In any case, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please feel free to like the vid and subscribe for more, as I have quite a few videos outside of stream content planned in the near future. And if you ever want to catch me doing games like this live, make sure to follow me on Twitch as well. See you next time.